Welcome to the Activating Teacher Leadership Institute webinar. This is Suzanne Farmer, and I work here in Kentucky with the Kentucky Network to Transform Teaching Grant, and we are really proud to partner with Teachers 21 on this exciting project as we embark on the second round of learning with teams from schools. I'd like to introduce Jill Harrison-Berg and John Diaria, who will be your hosts for this webinar and your facilitators for the Activating Teacher Leadership Institute.
Hi, this is Jill Harrison-Berg. I am the Director of Leadership Support and Organizational Learning at Teachers 21. And in that capacity, I have a number of roles that have given me the experience and pleasure of working with both teacher leaders and school and district leaders to think about teacher leadership. So in the Atlee Institute, I'm going to be bringing forward a lot of the things that I've learned in my work with these teacher leaders and school leaders. I'm also the program director for the Boston Teacher Leadership Certificate Program. And I've done a lot of writing and thinking about national board certification and how it supports the quality of teaching throughout our schools. John, want to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm John Doria. I'm the president of Teachers 21, and we're an organization that works with schools and school districts throughout the country to help them create the conditions that will help teachers and principals grow and improve to better serve students. And one of the key building blocks for that is to recognize what we see as the untapped leadership resources within our own buildings where teachers can help improve instruction, and how principals can support that effort by creating the collaborative conditions that help recognize this leadership going on currently in the building, and then to help align it to the goals that you want to achieve in order to improve learning for your students. And we're very excited about this collaborative effort with Kentucky educators.
So what brings us here, and what is Atlee? Atlee is the Activating Teacher Leadership Institute, and it came about as a part of a larger project called the Network to Transform Teaching. This larger project, NT3, familiarly known as NT3, is a collaboration among the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, as well as the Carnegie Center for the Advancement of Teaching, from which we borrow principles of improvement science, and also AIR as our evaluation partner. The Network to Transform Teaching was created in order to establish a networked improvement community, a network of states and districts that would collaborate and learn together about how to transform the teaching profession by developing and strengthening systems that would make board certification the norm and also capitalize upon the instructional expertise of board certified teachers. The network itself was important to create because of our shared belief that students need and deserve accomplished teaching, that every child should have a caring, competent, and qualified teacher, and that our system is not currently structured to make sure that could happen. We believe that a stronger teaching profession can actually guarantee accomplished teaching. That means we need to be thinking in more interdependent ways about the expertise of our teaching colleagues, and teachers need to be supported to not be standalone experts, but to collaborate and share and build professional capital that affects all schools and teachers. And we're also committed to the notion that board certified teachers and board certification can be levers for strengthening teaching in the profession, that the board certified teachers and the body of knowledge about board certification might actually be the tools that are needed to help unify professional expertise and capacity in ways that can better improve schools. So the network itself began with 6 cities and states. They're listed here on the slide: Arizona, Kentucky, New York, and Washington, as well as the cities of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and San Francisco, California. And the first 3-year grant, beginning in 2013, supported those 6 sites to establish plans and identify drivers that would move forward those 2 aims of increasing the number of board-certified teachers and also supporting them to move into instructional leadership roles through which they could make a bigger difference for their schools. This year, the SEED project, the Network to Transform Teaching project, was awarded a second SEED grant. So this is another 3-year grant of another $19 million to support the addition of 6 additional sites. And those include Alabama, Illinois, Maryland, North Carolina, and Clark County, Nevada, but also expanding our Albuquerque, New Mexico site to become a statewide site. Again, educators in each of those 6 cities and states have cross-stakeholder groups that are collaborating to think together about how to increase how to leverage the assets and the knowledge base about board certification to create a system that ensures all children will have accomplished teachers. So through a networked improvement community, we would be able to, we're recognizing that this aim of having every single student in America receive accomplished teaching cannot be achieved through ad hoc programs. A program that produces 5 more or 100 more or sufficient for serving the fact that we have 3 million teachers in America. And so instead we seek a systems approach. We seek to put accomplished teachers at the center of improving and teaching and learning in every school, and also to develop the know-how for this approach, how to sustain it and how to spread it across various contexts. Now, the Kentucky is one of the 11 teams that are part of the Network to Transform Teaching. And in Kentucky, we've been able to establish a homegrown definition of what teacher leadership is. Teacher leaders transform their classrooms, schools, and profession, activating teacher growth and achieving equity and excellence for students. In Kentucky, a cross-stakeholder team, again, has been convening for the past 3 years and has thought about the different areas in which teachers might lead. In other words, if we are able to develop and identify accomplished teaching, through what kinds of positions and roles and systems might they be able to make a greater difference for Kentucky's school children? And according to this definition of teacher leadership, they will be able to transform their classrooms, schools, and the profession by activating teacher growth and achieving equity and excellence for students. So following the principles of improvement science, the Kentucky team identified 4 main drivers for their aim. And their aim is even more specific in Kentucky than just supporting the teacher leadership. They want to be able to increase the visibility, buy-in, and implementation of teacher leadership. And in order to do that, had identified 4 drivers that were important to make that happen. The first is that leadership is aligned to student learning needs. And we believe that there are lots of different ways in which teachers might lead, but that if we are able to focus on specifically the kind expertise of every educator. And that's our fourth driver that supports us to pay attention to that. So given those fourth drivers, the Kentucky Network to Transform Teaching collaborated with Teachers 21 to design and institute a 6-month project in which we would together be able to support school teams to strengthen school and district leaders' abilities to identify, bolster, and tap the leadership potential of teachers, and also to understand how to support and align this leadership influence with schools and district goals that are student-based. And this is also so that teachers can be assets toward improved teaching and learning. And this is the purpose of ATLE. Now, ATLE is an inquiry cycle. It is a data-informed cycle in which we are setting specific goals that we were just sort of described in our drivers. We're creating specific plans for those goals, to reach those goals, and then we're going to act on it and assess how our actions are working before we reflect and adjust and set new goals. This kind of inquiry cycle is a cycle that our schools are regularly implementing. Teachers in their classrooms do this when they are accomplished teachers, thinking about the architecture of accomplished teaching. Board certified teachers are thinking about these students at this time in this setting. What do they know about their students? What are the goals for their students, and what interventions will they implement in order to take their students to the next level? It's also a process that we think about at school level, programmatic planning. This is kind of an inquiry cycle, and it's something that many schools implement through the DataWise program, a program that also has us thinking about looking at data to identify needs, identifying actions that might make a difference, and then monitoring the impact to readjust next steps. So this is the cycle that we'll be following within the ATLE project. And our projects all begin with student learning goals. Now, we try to practice what we preach within ATLE. In other words, we have actual learning goals for the participants in ATLE as well. And so when we held our June focus, we identified 4 specific outcome-based objectives, and we collected data to monitor how well we did. The ATLE project began with a full-day institute last year. This year it will be 2 full days in June. The first goal is to identify where leadership is happening in formal and informal ways within your setting. The second goal was to identify, develop, and support teachers as leaders who can be instrumental in guiding school and district to achieve its goals. The third outcome-based objective was to align the vision and actions of leadership within your building so that everyone is rowing in the same direction. And fourth is to consider what you may need as a leader to learn or change in order to make this work. And so we surveyed participants at the beginning of our June Institute as well as at the end to identify whether or not participants felt as though they had new knowledge and skills for these 4 areas. We're able to use the data that we collected to help us to think about how to improve and strengthen the program for this year, using just the same inquiry model that we're advocating teams use for their own projects. So we were engaged in many different activities during the June Institute. We presented a number of different tools that were each presented to support teams to make some progress in each of our 4 drivers. These same 4 drivers I described earlier, each came with specific tools. For example, one of the drivers is that, that roles, whether formal or informal, should be aligned with student learning needs. And one of the tools that we provided was some data analysis protocols that would help teams to identify their student learning needs. We also provided a role design tool that could help teams to think about how the role would specifically address the data identified need. A second driver is that roles would be supported culturally and structurally. And so we provided some tools that helped school teams to assess the conditions that might support teacher leadership within their districts. So these are some examples of the tools that we provided. And it was important that school teams included both school leaders, school administrators, I should say, as well as teacher leaders, because the learning of both audiences and specifically the learning together was really valuable. I wonder if, John, if you want to say a few things about the kinds of things that school and district leaders were able to learn in the Atlee Institute.
Sure. We discussed how leaders, one of their main responsibilities is to create a climate that allows teachers to continually grow and improve. And it's creating the weather and the conditions for that growth. And that boils down to the ability of a building administrator to balance two very important dynamics. One is psychological safety, and the other is accountability. And it's the psychological safety that allows adults, teachers in the building to try out new strategies, to look at data, and even when the results come in less than what you hoped for, that you use that data in an informative way rather than an evaluative way to try to come back with new strategies and approaches to improve learning the next day. And in a number of schools, teachers don't feel safe enough to be able to do that kind of learning and tinkering and experimentation. And on the other hand, you know, the building administrators are also responsible for accountability and trying to strike the right balance between psychological safety and accountability is really the fine art of building leadership. And within that domain, we discussed some of the strategies that building administrators can use to support that kind of balance.
Thanks. So in addition to the June Institute, after that full day, we sent teams off with a list of tools that might be useful and some benchmarks that they might want to meet. And we sent them off with a calendar and a timeline to help them meet that. But each team was also assigned a team facilitator, and this year we'll have team leaders who were able to meet monthly via webinar in order to share progress related to the benchmarks and also to learn from one another's puzzles and successes. So those monthly webinars took about an hour once a month. Team facilitators actually completed an online survey just reporting on what the team had been up to and what kinds of supports it would like to see, what kinds of challenges it might have been facing. Submitted that report each month, and then those reports became a strong backbone for our monthly webinars, giving us a chance to make sure that every team had the support and the place, the venue to answer questions that it had. We monitored the progress benchmarks. We tried to keep track for each team and which teams were working on a particular benchmark, which teams had completed certain benchmarks. And in doing so, we got a sense of which kinds of activities each team was working on each month. And that allowed us to have some rich conversations about the kinds of things that were happening. For example, last July, the top 3 benchmarks that the teams were working on were gaining consensus among influencers about how actions should be aligned for maximum impact was one of the top 3. And together, we were able to talk about how teams that had completed doing that were able to talk about what they'd tried, how it went. Teams that hadn't yet gotten there were able to learn from those experiences of those who had gone before them. Now, a critical purpose of the Atlee Institute in general and the webinars in particular is to build the confidence and capacity of the team facilitators as well. So one of the other things we do in our webinars is check in on how you're doing as a team coordinator, making sure that you're having the support that you need to succeed as a team leader. Now we'll reconvene in the fall. This year it'll be early November that we'll return for a day-long session. And it'll give us a chance to understand, again, Atlee as the start of an inquiry process. In other words, we may not by November have completed our full inquiry process, but that this is the beginning of something that can continue to spiral and improve our schools in a variety of ways. In November, we'll also be hoping to open participants' minds and eyes to a range of new strategies and to determine some new steps. Teams will have an opportunity to share what they're doing and get good ideas from one another. In November, we'll also hope to encourage and motivate teams to take this work to the next level. Because we won't be planning another face-to-face meeting after November, but we're not expecting that the Atlee work would end. We're expecting that we will have built the capacity and the momentum that what teams will be able to continue it on their own. And the fourth objective for the November Institute is to support teams to see each other's resources and to help you make connections beyond your own team. Last fall, we saw, teams that were working on a similar objective or a similar goal had a lot they could learn from each other, and they could plan cross-site visits or share resources or ideas, and that is another way to help sustain the work. We had a lot of very specific signs of success. We are advocating that teams use data and evidence, and we try to do the same with our Atlee project. So specifically, we saw some teams that had professional learning groups. One of them called them instructional practice cadres that were introduced on the first PD day in August, and they had their meeting that same afternoon. So again, planning this in June, mapping it back from a specific student learning goal, this team was able to actually launch new professional learning groups that addressed their school's student database need. Another success. Some teacher leaders piloted some book club names, and they launched their first book club. And another school had a mentor group that began, connected with the high school, and another group had a mentor program that was affiliated with the university. Some of the signs of success didn't have to do with specific roles. For example, in another school, the success was that a new committee structure was put in place. They had done some studying together about distributed leadership, grounded in some of the ideas presented in the Atlee Institute, and they were able to take that to the next level by structuring some new committees at the school. We did try to track specific activities that were reported related to each driver and saw many successes there as well. I've mentioned some of the specific roles that began, but there were other kinds of actions that led to roles or informed them. For example, some teams began to look at new test data in new ways. There were teams that worked together on creating stronger, more thoughtful job descriptions that would better set up teacher leaders for success. New sectors into the thinking and decision making, and engaging both community members or potentially, disenfranchised teachers into the decision making and having a voice in school improvement. So, what makes teacher leadership unique in the Atlee model One is that we're always putting students first. It's important to note that when we think about teacher leadership, there are a lot of different definitions of teacher leadership, and we believe that there are many kinds of teacher leadership that are important. But in the Atlee model, we're focusing specifically, in this case, on teacher leadership that starts with students. We map backward from a specific student learning gap that you see in your data, and we identify leadership actions and ways of tapping teachers' expertise that can address that student learning. Something unique about the Atlee model. Students to whom they're on that date, we can see that we'll have a June 22nd. I'm sorry. After the 18th, we will be reviewing applications, and approximately 1 week later, sites will receive notification about whether they've been admitted to the Atlee project. At that time, those teams will receive an additional survey which they will complete in order to reserve their spot in the Atlee Institute. So in terms of institute dates, the first day of the actual institute, it's a 2-day institute, is June 23rd and 24th for that 2-day institute. But team coordinators are expected to come the day before, on Wednesday, June 22nd. Because we'd like to be sure that team coordinators are set up for success. We want to give them some skills about how to work with the team. We want them to have a preview about what's going to happen on Thursday and Friday. And we want to make sure that they have tools and know where all of the resources are to support their teams throughout the 5-month project. Throughout July and October, we'll be having 4 monthly team coordinator webinars. And those dates have not yet been determined, but we tend to have them in the afternoons just once a month. And in early November, we'll be returning to convene together for a fall 1-day follow-up institute. Now, teams that apply for Atlee and are accepted receive at least 4 kinds of support. First of all, the cost of these institutes is completely covered by the grant. Training and support, of course, is included in this grant. Lunch will be provided at the institutes, and mileage will be provided for those who travel. In fact, if folks are more than 120 miles away, we'll also provide a hotel. So if you're interested in getting started, the first thing to do is to compose a team. And we do have some requirements that we've learned from last year's experience about the components that are important for a successful team. Teams should be between 3 and 5 educators, and all teams should include a principal. If it's a district team, it should include the superintendent. At least 1 member should be a teacher, and NVCTs are especially encouraged to apply to be team members, although that's not a requirement. One of the teachers should be identified to be a team coordinator so that we can help build the capacity for that person to support the success of the team. And the team should work together on the application. The application has a couple of thought questions that we'd like the team to puzzle over together as they complete it. The team will attend the June Institute together and share the work. It may be the case that that same team will attend the November Institute. However, we've built in the flexibility for you to include other team members if through the course of your work you decide there are other individuals who are better suited to participate in that November Institute. Now, the team coordinator has certain roles and responsibilities, and as mentioned, that coordinator's role is really to manage the site team's work and help make sure there's communication between the team and our Atlee project. The coordinator will participate in the training on June 22nd as well as the webinars, and they'll accompany the teams at both the June and the November Institute. But that team coordinator prior to each webinar so that we have a sense of each team's progress and can document the supports that are needed and provide supports. And then, of course, this coordinator is not meant to carry the load of the work. This coordinator have the teams to have the tools and strategies to do so, but this person should really be a coordinator and a convener, not necessarily the one carrying out the work of the team. We're expecting all team members to step up and share responsibility. So key dates are presented on the next slide. On or before May 18th, we're looking for applications to be submitted online. And no later than May 18th, the application should be submitted, but by May 23rd, award notifications will be sent out via email. The teams that have been notified of their participation will be asked to complete a registration survey, and completion of that by June 3rd will confirm your team's spot at the Atlee Institute. So, I wonder if we have any thoughts or questions or any issues that I haven't covered within this webinar.
Sure. So, Jill, thanks for your thorough overview of the work. I apologize. I've had some sound issues on my end, so I've been kicked off of the meeting a couple times. So I apologize if I'm clarifying some things that you may have addressed. One of the things that I thought might be worth clarifying, and I noticed it in the how to make up a team, but I know there's a heavy emphasis with our grant work with the National Board as a grant partner, and an emphasis on spreading the expertise of accomplished teachers. I thought it might be a good idea to clarify that, and I know this was mentioned, but that teams don't have to have board certified teachers in order to attend the Activating Teacher Leadership Institute. But what's interesting, I think that we've learned is that it's also the process of the Activating Teacher Leadership Institute actually parallels some of the work of board certification really nicely. So if teams don't have board certified teachers, this may be an opportunity to encourage people to pursue board certification, but it's certainly not a requirement.
Absolutely. I'm glad you clarified that. I think that this is the kind of activity that might build readiness and interest for teachers to pursue board certification, but it's by no means a requirement. And it will just be an opportunity to even leverage some of the assets and knowledge base about board certification without necessarily having a direct tie to the certification process.
Right, absolutely. I think one of the things I also thought it would be nice to clarify, because it is a role that is a little different than the project last year, is that the role of the team coordinator, who would be a good person to lead as team coordinator? I think we talked about the responsibilities, but I don't know that we spoke about who would be leading that work. And I think in our application, we'd asked them to identify a teacher that would serve as team coordinator.
Absolutely. I think that this project is really about teacher leadership, and we want to be building the capacity of teachers to be leaders. We feel as though the training that we're going to provide through both the June 22nd day and the monthly webinars will be leadership skills that could carry over into other kinds of leadership roles that these folks might be able to take on, formal or informal ways.
Mhm.
Therefore, we see it as a capacity building strategy to have teams think specifically about the teachers on their team as the facilitators, as these team coordinators. Other than that, so that might be a selection strategy, would be to be thinking about somebody who, in whom the team would really like to bolster leadership skills, because this will provide that kind of professional learning opportunity, as well as an opportunity to network with a cohort of team coordinators from across the state.
Right.
So it's an exciting opportunity for the right candidate.
And I know that, especially without those dates already locked in, that it might be someone taking on that role might be concerned about missing webinars. But I was thinking through, of course, those would be recorded if somebody had to miss that, and that those wouldn't be limited necessarily to team coordinators. If somebody wanted to have others on their team join, or if somebody wanted to serve as their proxy for a webinar, I think that would absolutely be fine.
Absolutely, that's a good point. The webinars will be using the same Zoom platform we're using now, and they'll be recorded in the same way this one is today. So the webinars will be available, the information will be available, and if a team coordinator can't participate, having another teammate is a good idea to participate because of the opportunity that the webinar offers for real-time problem solving. During those meetings, we'll be discussing problems of practice and puzzles and hiccups that folks are encountering in their districts, and it's a great place to get some feedback. And so we do hope that every team has somebody represented on those calls, even if the team coordinator can't do it.
Absolutely. So I also wanted to mention another exciting thing I think that's a little different this year. You had mentioned that last year in June our institute was 1 day, and now this year it's 2 days. And I thought it would be worth mentioning why we chose to add that extra time for teams.
Great, that's a good example of our ATLE project employing the same inquiry process that we are advocating for our teams, which is simply that we're learning from our experience and from our network. And we, looking at the data from last year and seeing the progress that teams were making, we recognize that it would really be beneficial for the ATLE Institute to build in team time for the team to actually get some, to begin to think together and integrate the ideas and tools presented at the ATLE Institute into an actual action plan and get some traction, get going on their plans before they leave. The ATLE Institute being held in June is right before summer vacation, and we know that busy educators really do need some downtime during the weeks that immediately follow the Institute. So by ensuring we have a 2-day Institute, we believe that ATLE teams will be set up for success because they'll leave the Institute with a really solid, concrete plan that's personalized to their setting and helps them to know what they're going to do as the school year gets going.
Right, and actually I think that was our number one feedback from the June Institute, was that teams really wanted more time, and some were asking us, can we come back tomorrow and keep working? So I think that that it was really exciting to see the teams gel together and to start thinking through this work. I thought that it would be helpful maybe to talk about a couple of teams and their process that they went through. I know that there were times, for example, where we worked with teams that may have come to the Institute with one idea that they really wanted to work through.
With one, were you gonna?
I'm sorry, it sounds like my sound is breaking up again.
Oh, no, I can hear you.
Okay, so what I was trying to say was that that teams would come in sometimes with one idea, and after they came to the Institute and really started having some conversations using the tools provided at the Institute, may have realized that they really needed to focus their efforts in a different place. So, for instance, maybe they were coming with one, thinking that they wanted to create a role, and then they actually determined that a role wasn't the solution, and that maybe they wanted to work on creating a better distributed leadership model, and how could they share leadership, and how could they tap all of their teachers in identifying their assets and their gifts and utilizing them better so that they can work together easier. Or maybe they wanted to work on some of the important work that John pointed out in terms of making their school a safer place for all educators to work together and improve those conditions, so that people could really thrive and lead together. But I was thinking that it might be helpful for people to hear about a couple of examples of teams. And I think my sound is breaking up again. Can you hear me? Jill?
Oh, now I can. Yep.
I'm sorry. For example, like we had a team that, for example, identified a learning gap of their students for their African American boys in reading, and then worked together to find mentors in the community that were African American, because their staff did not have that representation, and for those community members to serve as reading mentors for the students, and a community-wide project to inspire and improve reading with that population. So, I mean, it can really take on a lot of forms. It's really responsive. There were teams that may have not had an end product or an end role, but certainly made a lot of progress. And I think that just like that best practice teaching is about a process and not a product, that this best practice teacher leadership work is the same way.
Absolutely. And I think that we're really just now beginning to wrap back with teams who are participating. Began this process about a year ago, mapping back from a specific student learning gap. And they're able now to revisit those same data points and see whether or not there's been a change in those numbers. So it's kind of an exciting time to be able to see the progress. Sometimes the progress, as you said, is a specific product, like a new role or a new team. Other times the progress might be student learning jumps, or a combination of that. So there are lots of different ways that we're able to monitor the progress and the changes that are happening for students, for teachers, and for schools.
All right. Well, can you all think of any other closing comments or questions that we may want to address?
I think I would make one comment to the principals who might be listening out there, Suzanne.
Mm-hmm.
But the job of the principalship has become the idea that all students have to achieve high levels of success in order for them to be career and college ready, is an inspiring goal, but it's really not possible to accomplish without really tapping into the leadership and resources of the teachers. And I think that for some of the principals who might have come up the ranks 15, 20 years ago, much of the burden of leadership falls on their shoulders, and they think that unless assistant principals and themselves, that they're not successful as leaders. But the new concept of leadership really is the notion of really letting go of that single responsibility and figuring out a way of really using the leadership that's already active in the building and tapping it and aligning it to really be successful. And, that's easier said than done, but I think if you are a principal listening to this webinar, I think that within this work that Jill laid out lies the seeds of strategies that will help you address the many complex goals you're facing as a building principal.
Thanks, John. I think that's a really good point. So, unless there's another question or comment, I think,
Institute and way to apply.
I'm sorry, my sound was breaking up again. Go ahead, Jill.
Yeah, I think that we're really excited to be able to work with another round of schools this year, building on what we've learned from last year, and to just continue to grow the knowledge and the learning with you all. So we welcome you to apply. Don't forget that May 18th would be the deadline for this year's Atlee Institute.
Great. Thanks so much.
All right.
Looking forward to working with you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.